Layla Bennett hummed softly as she worked, pushing the mop across the shiny university floor. The long hallways of Bridgewater University always seemed to stretch endlessly during her night shifts, but she didn't mind. Layla had a secret joy. When no one was looking, she would let her body sway to the rhythm of the music playing in her mind. Dancing had always been her passion, though life had never given her the chance to pursue it. Dr. Edmund Graves was a man of stature. As a senior professor of history, he was known for his sharp mind and strict demeanor. But there was another side to him, one few dared to speak about. He often dismissed the university's janitorial staff with curt words and sarcastic comments, rarely acknowledging them as more than shadows in his pristine world. One evening, as Layla cleaned the lecture hall, she noticed the room was fuller than usual. Dr. Graves was hosting an after-hours gathering for his colleagues. Professors, dressed in their formal best, laughed and chatted over small plates of hors d'oeuvres. Layla worked quietly, hoping to go unnoticed, but her subtle movements caught the eye of Dr. Graves. "Look at her," Graves said with a chuckle to the group around him, nodding toward Layla. "Quite rhythmic for cleaning, wouldn't you say?" Layla froze, realizing she had become the topic of conversation. She avoided making eye contact, focusing instead on finishing her task quickly. "Miss Bennett," Graves called, his tone exaggeratedly friendly. Layla straightened her back and turned to face him. "Come here for a moment, if you don't mind." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Layla. She felt her heart sink. It wasn't unusual for staff to be asked to assist with minor requests during events, but the look on Dr. Graves's face told her this was something else. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady. Graves gestured toward her mop with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We couldn't help but notice how energetic you are while cleaning. Perhaps you'd like to share some of that enthusiasm with us. Show us a little dance." Laughter erupted from the small crowd. Layla's cheeks burned, but she kept her expression calm. "Sir, I'm just here to do my job," she said politely, gripping the mop handle tightly. "Oh, come now," Graves insisted, his voice dripping with mockery. "Surely you can give us a little show. It's all in good fun." The room buzzed with whispers and stifled laughter. Layla glanced around, feeling the weight of their stares. She wanted to leave, but the thought of walking away felt equally humiliating. Finally, she took a deep breath. "If you really want me to," she said, her voice steady but firm. Graves grinned, clearly pleased with himself. "Oh, absolutely. Let's see what you've got." The room grew quiet as Layla stepped forward, her heart pounding. Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept her head high. She had no idea that in a few moments she would change everything. Layla took a deep breath and stepped forward. Her heart raced, but she knew she had to do this. She could feel the eyes of the professors and students on her, all waiting to see what she would do. She had no choice but to move, even though every part of her wanted to run. She set down her mop and moved to the center of the room. The floor was smooth and shiny, perfect for dancing. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to block out the laughter and whispers around her. Music played softly in her mind, a rhythm that always brought her peace, and her body instinctively began to follow it. At first, her steps were slow, hesitant. She was unsure if she was doing the right thing. But as the seconds passed, something in her shifted. She remembered why she loved dancing so much, because it made her feel alive. It wasn't about anyone else. It was about her, her body, and the music inside her. Dr. Graves and the others watched, clearly expecting a clumsy performance. But Layla's movements were anything but awkward. She moved with grace and confidence, her feet gliding across the floor. Her arms moved fluidly, and her posture straightened. There was something almost magical about the way she moved, like the rhythm had taken control of her, filling her with strength. The audience, still expecting mockery, started to quiet down. The laughter stopped. Instead of seeing the janitor they had all dismissed, they were seeing something else, a person with talent, a person who had been hiding her true self from the world. Her movements were smooth and powerful, and the way she swirled and twirled seemed effortless. Layla was no longer the janitor in the room. She was a dancer, showing a piece of herself that no one had ever seen before. Dr. Graves's grin faded, replaced by a look of disbelief. He wasn't sure what to make of this. Layla had surprised him. His eyes followed her every movement, his mind racing as he struggled to comprehend what he was witnessing. This was not what he expected. Layla continued, her body now fully in tune with the music only she could hear. She spun and jumped, her feet light as air. For a moment, it seemed like the world around her had disappeared. There was no audience, no mocking professor, just the music and her own movement. The room was completely still, almost as if everyone was holding their breath. No one spoke, and for a moment, Layla felt like she was the only one in the room. She felt free, in control, as if the dance had become a conversation between her and the universe itself. When she finally stopped, breathing heavily, she stood still for a moment, her chest rising and falling. She wasn't sure what kind of reaction she would get, but she knew she had given her all. She had shown them who she truly was, not just a janitor, but someone who had something to offer the world, even if they didn't know it. Dr. Graves blinked, looking around the room. His colleagues were silent, unsure of what to say. Layla's courage had left them speechless, and even Dr. Graves could not find the words to mock her now. Layla stood there, waiting for something, anything. But the silence lingered. The silence stretched on, and Layla could feel her heart pounding in her chest. She stood there, waiting for the next move, the next word. But no one spoke. Dr. Graves's face was frozen in shock, and the other professors and students were still too stunned to react. For a moment, Layla felt like the world had stopped spinning. She had given everything she had in that dance, and now all she wanted was to leave. She had shown them who she was, and she was done. But just as she turned to pick up her mop, something inside her shifted. She realized she didn't want to just walk away. She didn't want to hide anymore. She didn't want to be the quiet janitor, the one who stayed invisible, the one people ignored. She had done something incredible, and for once, she felt proud. She had let her talent speak for itself. Layla paused. The room was still silent, but she could feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't just standing in a lecture hall anymore. She was standing in front of a group of people who had underestimated her, people who had never taken the time to see her for who she truly was. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides, and she took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let this moment pass without making an impact. She had worked too hard for too long to let people think they could control her. Turning back to the group, Layla's voice was steady, calm, and strong. "You all thought I was just a janitor," she began, her gaze meeting Dr. Graves's. "You thought I was here to clean your floors and nothing else, but I am so much more than that." The room stayed still. Layla could feel the eyes of everyone on her, but she didn't back down. She had made her statement, and now it was time for them to listen. "I don't need your approval," she continued, her words clear and unwavering. "I've worked hard for everything I have. And today, I showed you a small piece of what I'm capable of. This dance wasn't just for your amusement, it was for me. It's my passion, my voice, and I won't let anyone mock it." Layla's eyes shifted to the others in the room, and she saw the realization in their eyes. For the first time, they saw her not as the janitor, but as a person with her own life, her own dreams. They had seen her talent, something they could no longer ignore. Dr. Graves's face flushed red, and for the first time, he didn't have a quick retort. He stood there, speechless, unsure of how to respond. Layla didn't give him a chance to speak. She had made her point. Turning around, she picked up her mop and began to walk out of the room. She didn't need their validation. She didn't need to explain herself any further. As she walked toward the door, she caught a glimpse of the professors and students, still standing in stunned silence. But now, something had changed. They were no longer looking down on her. They were looking at her with respect. For Layla, that was all that mattered. As Layla walked toward the door, she could hear the soft shuffle of footsteps behind her. But she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. The moment was hers, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. Every step she took felt stronger, as if she was moving not just through the room, but through the life she had been building for so long. She reached the door and placed her hand on the handle, but before she could turn it, a voice stopped her. "Wait," Dr. Graves said, his voice hesitant. Layla paused, her heart beating faster. She wasn't sure if she should turn around, but something told her to. When she looked back, she saw that Dr. Graves wasn't smirking anymore. His usual confident air was gone, replaced by something Layla couldn't quite read. The other professors and students had fallen silent, their eyes fixed on her, as if waiting for her to make the next move. Layla stood still, her hand still on the door handle. She didn't speak. She simply waited. Dr. Graves shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat before speaking again. I didn't expect that," he said, his voice almost softer than usual. "You're very talented, Layla." It was the first time he had ever acknowledged her skill. The words felt strange coming from him, like he was struggling to admit something he didn't want to face. But Layla wasn't sure if she was ready to accept an apology. Not yet. She looked around the room. The people who had once mocked her now stood quietly, almost as if they were ashamed of their behavior. The power had shifted, and for the first time in a long while, Layla felt in control. "I'm glad you think so," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But I didn't do it for you. I didn't do it for anyone in this room. I did it for me." Dr. Graves stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Layla wasn't sure if he fully understood what she meant. She didn't expect him to. She wasn't asking for anyone's approval anymore. She had already won. She turned the handle and stepped outside, leaving the lecture hall behind. The cool night air hit her face, and she closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it in. She had done it. She had shown them who she really was, and in doing so, she had shown herself too. But as she started walking down the hallway, Layla couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was happening. She had always kept her talent hidden, afraid that if people saw it, they would only judge her. But now, that had changed. She had stepped into the light, and for the first time, she felt like her own person, freed from the labels that had been placed on her. When Layla reached the janitor's closet, she stopped for a moment, staring at the door. Inside, it was quiet, the mop and cleaning supplies waiting for her return. But Layla no longer felt like she belonged there. She wasn't just the janitor anymore. She was someone with dreams, someone who had something to offer. And though she didn't know it yet, this moment would be the start of something far bigger than she could ever imagine. The next morning, Layla walked into the university's hallway with her usual quiet confidence. Her steps were calm, but her mind was racing. She didn't know what to expect after the incident in the lecture hall. Would Dr. Graves try to apologize? Would anyone approach her to talk about what had happened? As she moved down the hallway toward the janitor's closet, she saw familiar faces, students and professors walking by, most of them not even glancing her way. But there were a few who did look at her. It wasn't the usual dismissive glance, but something different. Respect. Layla couldn't help but notice the change in the air. People who used to ignore her now seemed to recognize her. She felt the weight of their attention. But this time, it wasn't uncomfortable. This time, it felt empowering. She had spoken up the night before, and now she was silently reminding them that she was no longer invisible. She reached the closet and opened the door, only to hear footsteps behind her. Layla turned to find Dr. Graves standing at the end of the hallway. He was looking at her, his face serious but unsure. "Layla," he called, and his voice didn't have the same mocking tone it once did. Instead, it was softer, almost apologetic. She didn't say anything at first. Instead, she waited for him to speak. "I've been thinking about what happened yesterday," he said slowly, taking a few steps closer. and I realize I owe you an apology." Layla raised an eyebrow. She had to admit she didn't expect this. Dr. Graves wasn't the type to admit fault. He had always acted like he was above everyone else. But now he was standing in front of her, looking a little smaller than usual. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did," he continued. "I didn't recognize your talent, and for that I'm sorry." Layla studied him for a moment, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to forgive him right away, but she also wasn't interested in holding on to bitterness. She had moved on from what happened in that room, but now it seemed like Dr. Graves had to face the consequences of his actions. "I appreciate your apology," Layla said quietly. "But it's not just about yesterday. It's about how people like me are treated every day. It's about how we're overlooked and underestimated, just because of who we are." Dr. Graves nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I understand that now," he said, "and I'm willing to do what I can to make it right. I want to help create a better environment here, where people like you aren't ignored. I don't know how, but I'm willing to try." Layla felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. She wasn't sure if Dr. Graves' apology was enough, but she wasn't going to dismiss it. It was a step, and steps mattered. "You don't have to prove anything to me," Layla said. "But if you truly want to make things better, then do it for everyone, not just for me. Everyone deserves respect, no matter their job or their background." Dr. Graves took a deep breath, nodding again. "I'll do my best, I promise." For a moment, there was silence between them. Layla wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain. She had changed the way Dr. Graves saw her, and the way he saw people like her. That was enough for now. As she picked up her mop and bucket, Layla felt a sense of accomplishment. She didn't need anyone's approval, but knowing that someone like Dr. Graves was willing to change his thinking gave her hope. Hope that things could be different, not just for her, but for others who had been overlooked. And with that thought in mind, she walked away, ready for whatever came next. The days after the incident in the lecture hall felt like a whirlwind for Layla. She continued her work in the halls, as she always had, but there was a noticeable change in the way people treated her. It was subtle at first, just a glance or a polite smile. But over time, it grew. Professors who once ignored her now nodded in acknowledgement as she cleaned, and students who used to walk past without a second thought started to say hello. But the real shift came when Layla's performance in the lecture hall began to make its way through the university. A student who had been present the night before had recorded her dance and shared it online. At first, Layla didn't know anything about it, but the next day, she overheard a conversation between two students in the hallway. "Did you see the janitor's dance last night? It was incredible," one of them said, their voice filled with excitement. The janitor, "Wait, you mean Layla? I didn't know she could dance like that," the other replied. Layla stopped in her tracks, unsure of how to react. She didn't mind the attention, but she never expected her private passion to be shared so publicly. Soon, the video went viral, and her graceful movements were viewed by thousands. People began commenting on how beautiful and powerful her dance was. Some even shared their admiration for the strength it took for her to perform in front of a room full of strangers. The university's social media accounts were flooded with questions. Many students were curious about who Layla was and wanted to know more about her story. Some professors expressed their surprise, admitting they had never imagined Layla had such hidden talent. But not everyone responded positively. Dr. Graves, who had been forced to confront his own prejudice, was facing his own fallout. His colleagues and students were now questioning his past behavior toward Layla. There were rumors of complaints being made about his treatment of staff, especially toward those he had once looked down on. One afternoon, Layla was cleaning outside Dr. Graves' office when she saw him walking down the hallway. He looked tired, and his usual confident stride was replaced by something softer, almost uncertain. When he saw her, he slowed down and gave a small nod. "Layla," he said, his voice heavy, "I want to apologize again. Things have changed since the video went up. There's been talk, and I need you to know that I am truly sorry for how I treated you before." Layla gave him a small, understanding smile. "It's okay," she said. "I'm not looking for an apology. I've already moved on." Dr. Graves sighed. "I know, but it's not just about me apologizing. I've been reflecting on my actions, and I realize that I've made a lot of mistakes. I've treated people poorly, including you, and I want to change that." Layla wasn't sure if Dr. Graves could change overnight, but she respected that he was trying. "Actions speak louder than words, Dr. Graves. I don't need your apology, but I would like to see a change. Not just for me, but for everyone who works here." He nodded slowly. "You're right. I'll do what I can. Thank you for speaking up. It means more than you know." As Dr. Graves walked away, Layla couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. Change wasn't easy, but it had to start somewhere. And if her dance had been the catalyst for that change, she felt proud. She had shown the world that she was more than just a janitor. She was someone with talent, dignity, and the courage to stand up for herself. For the first time in a long while, Layla felt that maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to see her for who she truly was. The days that followed Layla's performance in the lecture hall felt strange. She was still doing her job, cleaning the halls, but now it felt like there was something different in the air. People were noticing her, and it was hard for her to ignore the attention. Some of her coworkers treated her with newfound respect, and the students who passed her in the halls gave her more than just a passing glance. But it wasn't just the students and staff who had taken notice. Dr. Graves, too, had been reflecting on what happened. After his initial apology, he had started to make more visible efforts to improve the environment at the university. He began working with other faculty members to create workshops and discussions about diversity, inclusion, and respect for all employees, no matter their role. At first, Layla wasn't sure how to feel about Dr. Graves's sudden interest in change. She knew that people didn't often change overnight, and she didn't want to get her hopes up too high. But she couldn't ignore the small steps he was taking. Dr. Graves was attending meetings and openly supporting diversity efforts. His attitude toward the janitorial staff had softened, and Layla noticed that he even greeted her politely when they crossed paths. One afternoon, Dr. Graves called Layla into his office. She was nervous at first, unsure of what this meeting might be about. But when she walked inside, she saw him sitting at his desk, looking a little more humble than usual. "Layla," he began, his voice gentler than before, "I've been doing a lot of thinking since everything happened, and I realized that my behavior wasn't just about you. It was about a bigger issue, one I hadn't really acknowledged before." Layla nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I spent most of my career in a bubble," he said. "I didn't pay enough attention to the people around me, to the staff who work hard every day. It's taken me some time to realize how wrong I was, and I want to change that. I want to do better, not just for you, but for everyone who works here, regardless of their position." Layla was silent for a moment. She could see that Dr. Graves was sincere, but part of her remained skeptical. Change wasn't easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But seeing him take responsibility for his actions made her think maybe things could improve. "I appreciate you saying that," she finally responded. "But actions speak louder than words. I'm not asking for you to fix everything in a day, but I want to see real change. I want to see the staff treated with respect and the work we do valued, no matter what our role is." Dr. Graves nodded. "I agree, and I'm ready to put in the effort. I've already started talking to the administration about making sure all staff are treated fairly and with respect. It won't be easy, but I promise you that I'm committed." For a moment, there was silence between them. Layla wasn't sure if she completely trusted Dr. Graves yet, but she could see that he was trying. That was enough for now. She had spoken her mind, and she had shown him what real respect meant. "I'm glad to hear that," Layla said with a small smile. "I hope it works, not just for me, but for everyone who works here. As she left Dr. Graves's office, Layla couldn't help but feel a small sense of hope. The road to change was long, but it had to start somewhere. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the beginning of something better for everyone at the university. She didn't expect miracles, but she knew one thing. She had already made a difference. Weeks went by, and the changes that Layla had hoped for slowly began to take shape. The university started holding regular meetings about respect and equality, and it wasn't just for the students and professors. It was for everyone. The janitorial staff, the groundskeepers, and the cafeteria workers were all invited to these sessions. It was a small but significant step forward. For the first time, Layla felt like her voice, and the voices of people like her, were being heard. Dr. Graves, although not perfect, continued his efforts to make things better. He became more involved in university events, speaking about the importance of inclusion and working with others to make sure that staff were treated fairly. He didn't shy away from the mistakes he had made. Instead, he used them as an example of how easy it was to overlook people and how important it was to correct those mistakes. One afternoon, Layla received an unexpected phone call. It was from the same student who had recorded her dance in the lecture hall weeks earlier. The student, a young woman named Emily, had been inspired by Layla's performance and wanted to meet with her. Emily was a dance major at the university, and she told Layla that her video had gone viral in the dance community. People were amazed by Layla's talent, and Emily wanted to offer her a chance to audition for a dance company that was looking for new performers. Layla couldn't believe what she was hearing. All of a sudden, her hidden talent was being recognized, and it wasn't just by her colleagues at the university. It was reaching people outside the school, too. This was the opportunity she had always dreamed of, the chance to do what she loved, on a bigger stage. After a long conversation with Emily, Layla agreed to attend the audition. She spent the next few days preparing, practicing the moves she hadn't performed in years. There was a mix of excitement and nervousness, but deep down, Layla knew that she had worked hard for this moment. It wasn't just about the audition. It was about everything she had gone through to get here. It was about finally believing in herself and the power of her own dreams. The day of the audition arrived, and Layla walked into the dance studio with her head held high. As she stood in front of the judges, she felt the same nervousness she had always felt before any performance. But this time, it was different. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a dancer, someone who had worked her entire life to get to this point. When the music started, Layla moved with confidence. She danced like she had never danced before, with every step full of passion and purpose. The judges watched in awe, and Layla could feel the energy in the room shift. For the first time in her life, she wasn't performing to prove herself to anyone. She was dancing for herself, and that made all the difference. When the music ended, Layla stood still, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. The judges were silent for a moment, and Layla wondered if they were even going to say anything. But then, one of the judges smiled and nodded. "That was incredible," the judge said. "We would be honored to have you join our company." Tears filled Layla's eyes as she stood there, unable to believe what had just happened. She had done it. She had made it. This was the beginning of a new chapter in her life, one where she would no longer be invisible. She had proven not just to the world, but to herself, that her dreams were worth pursuing. As she left the studio, Layla smiled to herself. She had come a long way, from the janitor cleaning the halls to the dancer who had found her place in the world. She wasn't just someone's employee anymore. She was someone with a future she had earned with her talent, her courage, and her unwavering belief in herself. And that was the greatest triumph of all. Months passed, and Layla's life had transformed in ways she had never imagined. Her performance had led her to a new career, one where she was no longer just the janitor in the background, but a recognized dancer with a bright future ahead. She had joined the dance company and was performing on stages she had once only dreamed of. But even as her career took off, Layla never forgot where she had come from. She still visited Bridgewater University from time to time, and every time she walked through the halls, she saw the change she had helped spark. Students and staff greeted her with respect and admiration, and Layla felt a deep sense of pride in knowing that she had been the catalyst for that change. Dr. Graves, too, had changed. He was still the professor he had always been, but now he treated everyone with the same respect. He had worked hard to make the university a more inclusive place, and his efforts had not gone unnoticed. Layla had become a symbol of that change, a reminder of how one person's courage could shift an entire environment. One day, Layla received an invitation from the university to speak at a special event. It was a celebration of diversity and inclusion, and they wanted her to share her story. At first, Layla was hesitant. She wasn't someone who liked to be in the spotlight, but then she realized how important it was for her to share what had happened. Her story wasn't just about dance. It was about the power of self-belief, the importance of standing up for yourself, and the change that could come from challenging the status quo. The day of the event arrived, and Layla stood in front of an audience of students, staff, and faculty. She had prepared a speech, but when she took the microphone in her hand, she realized that there were no words on the page that could truly capture the journey she had been on. So she spoke from the heart. "I never expected any of this," she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. "I was just a janitor, doing my job and staying out of the way. But when I danced that night, I wasn't just dancing for you all. I was dancing for myself. I had spent so many years hiding my true self, thinking that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. But I learned that we all have a voice, and we all deserve to be seen and heard. And if my story can inspire just one person to step into their own light, then it will have all been worth it." As she spoke, Layla could see the faces in the crowd. Many were nodding, some were wiping away tears, and others were smiling with understanding. She had become a symbol of hope for so many people, showing them that it was never too late to change, to follow your dreams, and to stand up for what you deserve. When Layla finished her speech, the audience gave her a standing ovation. It was more than just applause. It was a recognition of her strength, her journey, and the impact she had made. As she left the stage, Layla felt a sense of peace. She had found her place in the world, and she had helped make the world a little bit better along the way. Layla's legacy was not just about her dance or her newfound fame. It was about the courage to be yourself, to push past the limits others set for you, and to believe in your own worth. She had proven that change was possible, and that even one person could make a difference. And as she walked away from the event, Layla knew that her story was far from over. It was just the beginning.